Good afternoon. It's a beautiful day here in France. It's midsummer 2021, and this video is in the Grail Science series video number 3. This video is entitled The Grail in Practice, Inhabiting an Array, Bliss Biology, Keys to Plasma Remote Healing. And the website is goldenmean.info/realgrail. So the first film in the Grail series was a smash hit, if I may say, Deep History and Science of the Grail, filmed with Laura there, you see, on our YouTube channel of 1.2 million views, youtube.com/Dan Winter Fractal Field. The Grail film number 2, which is Grail Science, the Holy Grail Comes to the West, with the William Buehler and Templar mechanics and more, filmed with Jason Rice, is on the editing table right now, and Jason will have that soon. So stay tuned for the Holy Grail Science film number 2, Holy Grail Comes to the West, and the Spiritual Destiny of the Americas. That's film number 2. It's filmed and being edited now. Stay tuned right here on this channel. So this is Grail Science series number 3, and actually this series will end with some suggestions for remote healing work in the array mechanics of what is the Grail, a fractal array, understanding the physics of longitudinal remote healing, including suggestions for Therapy practitioners about remote healing. But I have a bit of an assignment from Jason what we didn't complete in the Grail Science series part 2, which was the actual narration of some of the images from William Buehler and the advanced Templar mechanics. Remember, we were talking about William Buehler's very advanced Templar Grail series, monitoring the planetary Earth grid systems and how these magnetic lines tie together in one body, as it were, and how to use them to inhabit an array. And we're going to use that as a launching point for what it feels like to live in an array, to unpack your aura, in which you realize that you're inhabiting a bigger and bigger electric field, sort of like Dr. Buck in the book Cosmic Consciousness, driving by a snowy forest and suddenly having this intense bliss experience and feeling like the whole world around him was alive. Now that feeling comes in certain electrical circumstances as well, and frankly, unfortunately, very rarely in a metal city, metal jungle full of electrosmog. No, it happens in nature, just as it did for Luke Skywalker when he wanted the Jedi Force to be with him. So understanding how to inhabit an array does have to do with something like understanding the fractality of nature. So we were going to look at some of the Templar mechanics visuals there from William Buehler. So we started that graphic series. This is the graphic series at goldenmean.info/Buehler, which is the key graphic series on the William Buehler Templar mechanics. And this is one of the slideshows there. Now this first slide is actually from Vincent Bridges, who we were talking about earlier in this series, who mapped this pent of the giant magnetic map of 5 major caves named after Mary Maag, including Marie de la Mer on this bottom right. He called it a pentagram in Saint-Remy in South France, which had to do with how this Grail bloodline came to South France to inhabit an array. So these are other examples. This is visualizing the fractality, the implosion possible in these pentarrays. This is another view. We'll have more of the pentadodecaic Earth grid. And notice how that points directly to Washington, D.C. right here. And here is the pent array on Washington, D.C. from the original Templar grid map. And this is applying that golden ratio array spiral implosion from the spiral in time, as it were. The physics of synchronicity is the physics of charge coupling. Remember, time is a name for charge rotating, and when the rotations embed, perfectly nesting, idealized by golden ratio, then you have that golden ratio in time, the physics of fractality in time, which was the name of the Templar agenda for the repair of the fabric of time. Now that you know what time is, which is charge rotation, you can know the physics of coincidence. So this film about the golden ratio cascade to 2001-2 is from Geoff Stray's book on the fractality in time beyond 2012. So this is from the book 2/3 by David Myers and David Percy on the pent arrays there on Washington compared to Mars. And here's that giant pent array on the United States from goldenmean.info/Washington. And so and remember, we're finishing our series on the Holy Grail comes to the west. This is the pent of the 5 places named El Dorado in North America. And this is the pent of the sacred sites around Rennes-le-Château, the basis of many of the Grail stories in Europe and the tours we've been doing about the science of the Grail in southern France, and also discussed in the book Genesis. So now we're back to William Buehler here. Here's some of his major magnetic maps of the major star lines and magnetic lines across Europe. This is the one through Malmo, the Icarus line, the Tahara line. We'll talk more about these sacred magnetic lines in William Buehler's Templar agenda of the repair of the fabric of time. Let me just see if I can quit this. I'll get better resolution here. I'm trying not to get the grainy image there. So the key point of William Buehler's work here, you see this thing that looks like a double Valentine in all most of his Templar grid mechanics picture. He calls this the Rochelle grid, R-E-S-H-E-L, and you see that the double Valentine is literally what we're calling the Grail animation. So remember when we played our Grail animation, let's see if we have that right here, that if you animate the path of the Grail, literally how the Grail works on the land, and let's see here, this, and imperfect sequence. So the Grail animation is at goldenmean.info/Grail, and it's also at goldenmean.info/RealGrail. Yeah, we have too many things here. Here we go.
Choosing compassion carefully aligns the magnetic field donuts around the heart so that nest dodeca icasa perfect embedding, self not self, squirting pineal pine cone through the speed of light into time intent creates the future, and revolving that spin path to 0 point in the blood, we get the Holy Grail, which has no inside or outside, solves the problem of separateness, contains self-embeds the Sufi heart within heart, feminine reproductive organs, into that 3D fractal you can zoom in forever and always see the same thing, heart within heart, perfectly self-contained, self-embedded compassion.
So I narrated that maybe 25 to 30 years ago, but it is as relevant today as it was then. So you see that when we're talking about the Rochelle grid in William Buehler's Templar Mechanics, you see that double Valentine, physics of the only possible 3D fractal, which is literally the Holy Grail, which is what the mystics are seeing when they're seeing plasma converge into intelligence and mindfulness, because that is the beginning of the ability to inhabit an array. So now we're going to go back to our Buehler series here after that short, oops, hide that one. Okay, so the next slide here is his star maps of Europe, the memory grid, and here's a zoom in on the Icarus line. Notice where this crosses here, the south of France. This is all at goldenmean.info/Buehler. See these major magnetic lines, Gibraltar, Crete, Kabul, and this is the north from Helsinki, Riga, Athens to Victoria Falls. See how huge the star maps which William Buehler was working on in his Templar agendas. The Malta grid, this is the star map, and Rochelle grid on Malta. And this is the big map of Europe from William Buehler. And see the base rings. See how they center here, pointing down toward Malta, and they go right through the sacred lines up here to Sweden. Here's another Rochelle grid here, and here's the line crossing UK, and again, check these out at goldenmean.info/Buehler. So as he's describing these, he's also describing how plasma comes to come have a body and take wing. The recurrent theme here, like Coulomb, meaning charge of Chris Columbus, which is how plasma takes wings, and this is a recurrent theme in the Templar agenda. So this is making the larger body of man. Here he's talking about Oceanus and the La Rochelle, the launch point of the Templar Navy, La Rochelle, as it were. Astara, great center, was his term in his map. These are the key points: Rome, Bornholm, Sintra. Sintra is the nose of Portugal, which is the famous Templar center there, where we've lectured many times. Yeah, and again, here's Sintra. And so this is the most important Astara grid map from William Buehler. Again, once you begin to understand how these magnetic lines come alive and make a living body, Maga, the ancient dragon poet, Mag, dragon queen, the Astara grid, flower of life, these terms. And then he laid this on the Templar chapel designs, in this case Tarragon. Now here we're switching to David Ritchie, who got many ideas from William Buehler in We the Scythians. This is from the book We the Scythians by David L. Ritchie, who we knew, who studied with Buehler. And just a couple of the images from there. You see the Edinburgh map. If we zoom out here, let's see if we can zoom out. Let's see this a little better. Let's zoom this up. So this is the major magnetic line. This is the Roslyn Chapel, Roslyn, and here is down below is the Michael line. Yeah, here's the Michael line across here. The Rosie line, as the Roslyn. And then if we zoom in on that, we come to, we zoom in right here to this area right here below Edinburgh. That's where we're zooming now. And we come to this living body, literally the Temple of the Solomon, and you see the star map below Edinburgh. This is just one image from David Ritchie's work. Later, We the Scythians, Skythians. And here is the book, We the Scythians by David L. Ritchie. And this is that, Jerusalem star map in Solomon in Roslyn, which was the ancient rose line brought north into the UK, which is the body of Berith An, as Lawrence Gardner said, Berith, birthplace of An, Anunnaki, the bloodline, Britain, Berith An. So you see that this metaphor kind of fits that star map story. Now let's see if we were finished with our pictures here. Just the last of the Buehler shots from that tour. It's called the Spiritual Geography of Heaven. So he called this the four seals of the central seed of Holos. This is from a lifetime of work with William Buehler, who claimed with Simeon and Maya in their publication Temple Doors to be communicating with the memory of Thoth, as in Thothmosis, sons of Thoth, Tahuti, we've spoken about many times. So this is literally the agenda of Thoth, according to William Buehler, who believed that this was indeed what the Templar inherited from the Thoth intention, as Thothmosis, remember we discussed, became Akhenaten Moses. He was working on the language of the Ark, which was the breastplate of Metatron. Remember, this is how you assemble plasma bodies and inhabit them, in this case in the breastplate. And the Aton disk, Aton meaning sun god. So this goes on and on from the William Buehler material. Now, the next piece of this that we wish to discuss, let's see, I'm looking at my notes here. So we did a Grail review of William Buehler and the animations with David Ritchie. Now, in terms of talking about what it feels like to inhabit an array, I wanted to try to tell my own story a little bit. And it happens that where I am here, which is not far from this animation here, so this is the sacred mountain of Canigou. And remember, on that star map on Canigou, if we look at, here is Mystical Legends of Girona, a City of Secrets by Patricia Chaplin, who was a niece I believe, of Charlie Chaplin, who wrote this book, Jerome, A City of Secrets, and she was here and we were friends, and she depicted this star map of the two twin towers. And here's the twin towers from the legend and from the story, and here's the twin towers at Aragon, and one of those towers is the Magdalene Tower at Girona. Giron means to spiral, and they call them girons, the spirals. And when Saunier of Rennes le Chateau went to Girona to the Kabbalah school to learn how to build the Magdalene Tower, Migdal, two tower, remember, first Grail, and then took that information to build the Magdalene famous tower at Rennes le Chateau. Now, the approximate halfway point between those two is a focal point where two pine cones kiss noses at some place called Torinia and Mount Canigou, which, if you look at what Mount Canigou is in the star map of the Twin Towers, it's right here, and if you animate to 3D the face of those of the mountain of Canigou, there it is. You see, it's a pine cone. That is a pine cone. This is Torinia, this is the village, and here is the pine cone shape. Now, we believe this valley, the locals say, was named after Thoth, actually Thoth Valley, Jehudi, and we believe this is called Per Pinion, and through the pine cone, which is the path of initiation where our friend Andrew actually did that ritual and unfortunately died in the lightning there. It's quite a story. Point being, Per Pinion becomes Per Pinion, which is the ritual initiation of going through the pine cone, which is indeed how you climax in the vortex. So now, how does that relate to my story? Well, I'm sitting here a couple of villages away, and there's a magnetic line from Canigou, and actually the magnetic line crosses this house right on this couch that I'm sitting on. And so when I lie on here and I close my eyes and I feel, after 30 years of completing, quite a bit of plasma, too much fire actually at the crown chakra. So when I close my eyes, I can see very big pictures. And I feel, I feel that I'm inhabiting this array. And I can float away into it and inhabit that array. Sort of like Dave from 2001 to 2010, the film. He said, "The monolith, the dolmen, there's thousands of them in here, Dave." And suddenly, in the next film, he could appear in anyone's TV set he wanted to because he was inhabiting the array. You get the metaphor? Never metaphor I didn't like. I didn't like most of the fives. No, I'm kidding. So the point is that when the magnetic lines have synchrony, the compression points where the transverse inertia is translated to the longitudinal, the compressional wave, and they bounce between those fractal nodal center points, the still points, sometimes called sacred space. So the still points are points of leverage in that array where the longitudinal inertia exchanges inertia electric power with the transverse. So going back to the slides that we were supposed to display here now, we had, just bear with me one moment to get the correct slideshow in front of us. Yeah, so this is good. So we've seen this slide many times. So at the still points of compression of the magnetic lines, the compression wavefronts converge in symmetry, so they form symmetrical vortex cones where pine cones kiss noses. And so in that geometry only, that vortex can translate the vorticity, the inertia of the up and down transverse EMF, and convert it down that vortex, which looks like a caduceus from the side, at 510 golden spirals on the perfect 60-degree implosion cone, which is the physics of the imploded outcome. And out the center of that vortex, at the place where the pine cones kiss noses, at the dimension named Planck, the universal musical key signature of the universe, at that threshold of compression, the inertia is translated from up and down transverse inertia to compressional longitudinal interferometry, a compression wave, sometimes incorrectly called scalar or torsional. And that compressional longitudinal waves, if you read Tom Bearden, is the physics of gravity wave, is the physics of all action at a distance, which Einstein incorrectly called spooky, and is the physics of remote healing with plasma and therify.net. So lining up the nodes in that array is what enables you to distribute that inertia. Now remember, at those nodes, that compression is like, because these ping pong balls are locked together in the stillness of that array, and it does feel like an icy stillness. That it's like, you know, when they have those, we have the pictures, but we'll just describe it. When the ping pong balls, when the billiard balls are all lined up and they're all touching each other because they're locked together in the stillness of the array, then if you touch one ball, then a billion billiard balls down the array, one bounces off at the other end. Well, in effect, because these billiard balls are locked together by the fractality of golden ratio into that still point, just like Jodie Foster's dodeca of lucid dreaming in the movie Contact, those still points then exchange inertia measurably faster than light, just the way Hodowanic and Ramsey measured gravity waves, which we now know are longitudinal EMF, moving faster than light. He could see star explosions arriving at Earth using a simple capacitive coupling, faster than light. Hodowanic and Ramsey, that's another story. But the point is that faster than light, everywhere at once kind of perfect connectivity is enabled only by longitudinal interferometry, sometimes called sacred space, or the grid, or the collective mind, or the collective unconscious, or the communion of saints, or Akashic records. So many names, but so few electrical engineers to describe it. That's why I'm here. So the point is that the connectivity of that array becomes faster than light and infinite and infinite, quite literally, enabling the concept of mindfulness. So remember, you're very comfortable thinking, oh, there's a bunch of spark gaps inside my head called the neurons and the synapses, phosphorus flares. And so you're very comfortable thinking, well, I inhabit that array. Like Carl Prabram talking about the holographic brain, and that it's measurable. When you focus your eyes, the synapses fire more rapidly. This has been measured, okay? So the array literally gets more optical resolution because there's more sparks firing in the synapses inside your head when you focus your attention. Whereas if you have shifty eyes, you don't want that used car salesman. If you have shifty eyes, the resolution of the array inside your head, synaptic spark gap firing density, goes down when you have shifty eyes. Okay, it's been measured. This is MIT. I actually know Avern, his last name. It's a very famous study at MIT. So clearly, focused human attention causes the spark gaps in your synaptic array to fire more densely. So literally, the optical array gains resolution. Well, it gains plasma density. Now, we've always been happy thinking that we're inhabiting this hologram inside our head. And remember, we said the hologram in the mirror and the magnifying glass, the lady didn't want to carry her mirror around with her because it was too heavy in her purse, so she had a hologram made of her mirror, and then she wanted to fire the guy that made the hologram because she couldn't see herself in the mirror in the hologram of her mirror. She was carrying a hologram of a mirror around in her purse instead of a mirror. Well, it turns out that other items inside the hologram you can see very well in the hologram reflected in the mirror. The mirror works for other objects in the hologram, but doesn't work for objects outside the hologram, except. This is our famous article, From Hologram to Hologram, in my first book, Alphabet of the Heart. So the hologram is hollow and not holo, unless so the lady went back to the guy who made the hologram to get her money back, and the scientist told her, well, there is a way that you can show up inside the hologram even when you're outside the hologram. And he said, it's called phase discipline. And she says, what, I got discipline? What's that? And he says, well, basically it means you need to be in phase with. And how do I get in phase with? Or I want my money back. Well, he says, well, if you get a little bit of the original light, that laser, that coherence, in phase with. Now, the map to the spin symmetry phase discipline to make the inside hologram in phase with the outside hologram, so then you can now look in the hologram, in the mirror, in the hologram, and see yourself reflected in the mirror, in the hologram, from outside the hologram. This is real physics now. This is not just a fairy tale. Is that original light of phase discipline. And that phase discipline is, well, we said it's the Hebrew alphabet in one sense, because it's the map to the symmetry tilts to phase like the inside with the outside, which is why if you visualize the sequence of Hebrew alphabet letters, which are simply the 7 turns of the spiral on the torus indexed by the tetra, then you get the phase discipline, so you can make a golem. I mean, you can freeze the hologram of the vortex in the optical cortex in the symmetry sequence required for phase discipline. Another way to look at that is that inside the optical cortex, there's a vortex donut. And as we know from the kids who can see without their eyes, they're very clear when they close their eyes and they get relaxed and a little bit blissful. Then, and only then, a tornado vortex little black hole wormhole tube shows up inside their head, and they all say, I'm seeing through this tube, even though they're blindfolded. And what's really cool is after you learn to go into that bliss state, you can take that squirt gun of the tornado with an eyeball in it outside your head. Ain't it cool? All the medical surgeons who have proven in their near-death experiences that they saw from outside their body, well, we just explained the plasma physics of how you take your vision outside your head by inhabiting that vortex. Well, now it turns out, you see, that when that vortex, plasma vortex of charge, which has an eyeball because it's implosion charge, which sorts waves into phase, named perception, fractalfield.com/conjugate perception. Phase conjugate charge implosions that cause a perception. It's why 30% of people who get out of the plasma field, therapy.net, for example, and feel some sharpening of vision. And we have a vision lecture with that. So it also turns out that when you get to a center of a node in that array, like the dodeca-ecosa Earth grid, let's get some of those pictures up now. Full sequence. And we're supposed to do slides number 387-401. So we're talking now about the Earth grid being dodeca, icosa, and Y. And so if you get to node sites of that Earth grid, which are on these magnetic cross points, just like William Bueller's Rochelle grid here. We have some of those pictures. So this is one of those Templar pictures. This is from the Holy Grail across the Atlantic, which really should have been included in film number 2, which Jason is editing now. These are the plasma shadows of how the charge creates an array by the vortex nesting. We talked about the arc and the Holy Communion, but we wanted to talk about the Earth grid line. So remember how the Earth grid has always been modeled as dodeca-ecosa, you see in the picture there. And this is the most famous one from Beth Hagens and Becker, anti-gravity in the world grids. Beautiful example that if you map these nodal points, and remember at these nodal points it has been measured that radioactive critical mass is reduced, Bruce Cathy, and that it takes, these are the points at which measurably you can create telepathy, for example, cozy rev mirrors. And further now, I'm explaining to you why, that when you inhabit the array, you need to learn basic dowsing skills so you can feel a magnetic line for yourself. And your blood will grow the more you can hold bliss to become a waveguide. So when you walk across these nodes and your arms are out at your sides, your hair will stand up and you'll know you're on a magnetic line, because that's the blood of the Earth Mother, as it were. So inhabiting the array, in part, is being able to sense what Castanet called these places of power. So this begins to get us to our science we want to talk about why placing things like Therapy at these magnetic line cross points enables healing at a distance, because this is what it means to inhabit an array. In the Australian work we did years ago with Rob Gourlay, notice that the color and white lines here are a satellite image of magnetic flux density on the land, in this case around Canberra, Australia. In black are the major lines which became roads, which were Aboriginal song lines. So notice how the Aboriginal song lines followed the magnetic lines. It's very important to see that what they called song lines, the dreaming track, were literally the magnetic river currents of the bloodstream of memory, of the collective unconscious, ancestral memory, Mother Earth, as it were. So, as we've said many times, when Kepler modeled planetary orbitals as implosive platonics, what he was really saying was gravity stability is enabled by the non-destructive charge collapse, enabled by the golden ratio perfected nesting, which is the only way platonics can embed one side inside the other. So this is not only a picture of planetary orbitals, this is a picture of non-destructive charge collapse, the cause of gravity. That's what was hidden in Kepler's picture of the non-destructive charge collapse. And when you rotate these things, of course, here's the solar system plane ecliptic and the galactic, the Earth equator, the solar equator, and the galactic equator, and they nutate precess with respect to each other. And when the perpendicularity climaxes, you have what's called the rapture, which is this implosion event, sometimes incorrectly called the Kazan cloud or the photon cloud, too many names. But and notice that you actually fabricate gravity when you nutate precess in phase the short wave of the gyroscope with the long wave of nutation precession. And when they lock into phase, you can speed up. So the phase relationship of the planetary rotation to zodiacal rotation has to be fractal to stabilize gravity. This is more of what's meant by the repair of the fabric of time by William Buehler. And this is, again, the advanced material. So we've carried on quite a bit here. Now, what we promised, oh, well, there's just one more story. In my notes, there's one more story. I'm supposed to tell the story of the Maid of the Mist. You know, I grew up near Niagara Falls, New York, and if you've ever ridden that boat called the Maid of the Mist, they generally tell the myth, which was there an Indian maiden who jumped off a cliff into the mist of Niagara Falls, whose ghost inhabits the mist. Now, supposedly she wasn't able to have the lover she chose to marry, and she'd rather become a ghost rather than not follow her heart. Well, that is a place where a plasma spirit can easily inhabit because the mist and the magnetic lines at Niagara Falls create such a cross points of plasma that plasma propagation is enabled. So ancestral memory is focused there, and therefore you have the Maid of the Mist. This is an example of choosing the place to die is so important, along with the non-destructive compression green line, red line, which is the literal black hole needed for successful death. That article, goldenmean.info/immortality, the Heinrich Clouvet form constants, lattice cobweb tunnel spiral you see at death, is accompanied by an infrasound during death, all of which is required for the implosive compression of charge necessary to non-destructively translate in vorticity or transverse into longitudinal array inertia, which is where your ghost must go at death. And if you don't get up enough inertia at death, your ghost is stuck. It's really true. And if you are lucky enough to die in a sacred site in a forest very intentionally and beautifully, then you have that great implosive compression. You know, you see your whole life compressed at the moment of death. There's a reason for that compression. And you know that death visions are contagious. Surgeons are clear from Ray Moody. So the physics of successful death is understanding that requirement to do compression, because that's what gets you into inhabiting that array. Hey Ave, where the breath of charge takes flight, heaven, or plains of Sharon, the infinite stellations of the valence electrons of the gold powder, which is the Hebrew name for heaven, or Champs-Élysées, right through the center of Paris, is actually where the charge Champs-Élysées takes flight, you see? So where charge takes flight, hey Ave, is the only physics of heaven, and I dare any Catholic to explain the physics of heaven better. That is the physics of heaven, and as far as I'm concerned, if you don't understand that, then you are actually not teaching the science of spirituality. That is the only science of spirituality. Remember, the Principal Christos came back as a scientist. Excuse me, but if you haven't studied the electrical engineering of plasma projection and plasma interferometry and how to inhabit an array, you cannot actually teach spirituality. Hello, electrical engineering required, 101. And it makes personality worship and religion wars obsolete. Ain't that cool? Okay, so I carried on. I'm going to get off my stump now and finish this lecture. So, the climax of this lecture, which is called Putting the Grail into Practice, remember it is Bliss biology to inhabit that array, was practical suggestions for understanding array mechanics to do remote healing with Therify.net, and we have many questions. It's incredible how many Therify and Quantify users are reporting success doing remote healing, including Valerie working to Africa from here. And it's just incredible. So many stories are coming in, they're pouring in. So we have distilled some suggestions, actually. If somebody says, well, how do you do remote healing? Well, a couple things. One, since the action at a distance requires longitudinal connection, longitudinal interferometry, it is better, of course, if sender and receiver are near or close or on a magnetic line or magnetic line cross. That's ideal. And we've always, of course, said Therify plasma works better if it's like a sacred site or in nature or a magnetic line cross, or at the very least, natural material and fresh air, something that allows charge distribution. If you got an aluminum box in a big city, you might have to work a little harder, but it's still possible. Sometimes you walk on water, sometimes you take a bridge. So the magnetic line alignment affects ability to heal at a distance. Now, in terms of timing, just like Agnihotra, the physics is, the sunrise and sunset requirement is because at those right angles, the long magnetic lines conjugate, just like four-wave mixing and phase conjugate optics. So sunrise and sunset for sender and or receiver. Sometimes in Africa it's a little different, but at least sender or receiver can be at sunrise or sunset, and it does make a difference. It's quite dramatic. I feel here when the sun is setting at 15, 10-minute interval, you just feel that stillness going out and out in your auras. And of course, then equinox or solstice would also, etc., 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 the right angles. So timing is everything. Horseshoes, hand grenades, lovemaking, and remote plasma healing. There's also the radionic principle, which is that a good photograph with some feeling of the person you're working on is helpful. Also, of course, the radionic principle, a fingernail or hair sample would also be something to act as a witness. That's actually good physics because it's resonance coupling. So you can put that picture or sample right there in the field. So you have alignment, timing, radionic principle, choice of the site. One other thing we can mention for healing at a distance, by actual experiment, we are clear that the people who we work on, many times Valerie did, that it does work better if sender and receiver are actually tuned in and focused. So if the receiver can be aware of when this is happening, is willing to get still, be centered and focused, it's amazing. It really is. It's better than if the receiver is asleep. I mean, if the receiver is very sick and can't be awake, well, you can try, and there's things you can do. But if the receiver can be awake and focused and tuned in and aware and in phase and realize that someone is sending love, that definitely creates and enhances that connection. So it's better if the receiver is actively aware and participating. It creates that phase lock. So there are many things you can do to improve the ability to do healing at a distance. And in terms of session time with Therify, typically about 10 minutes is good, and sometimes alternate 9 minutes on, on, as a maximum, for example. So there are some very specific things you can do to enhance the possibility of healing at a distance. Much of this is also true of Quantify, which is at lower power, but you can You can play with the harmonics, and people are reporting successes with Quantify as well. It's much lower power, but it's nice. You can play with harmonics and actually tune into chakra sounds, etc. So either way, these principles apply, because now, unlike Einstein, we are not calling action at a distance spooky. No, we're calling it science that's testable and predictable and operates based on a principle that we can understand, the locking together of these still points, which is how we inhabit an array, which is the real practice of the Grail. Thank you very much. See the info at fractalfield.com. Thank you for your attention. It's been a blessing. Goodbye.